Okay, hello, my friends. It is Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024, and this is the Daily Brief. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Today, I want to readdress the numbers issue, the number of Ukrainians killed and wounded, and how that compares to the Russians killed and wounded. Periodically, I'll have somebody say, well, you always start with this, here's how many Russians are off the battlefield or killed or wounded, and you never talk about Ukrainians. No, I do. And the last time I did was on Thanksgiving, and that was because The Economist magazine just came out with their estimates. Now, those estimates were contradicted by Zelensky, so we want to talk about that, and I'll show you what that looks like. We'll do the math right in front of you. Okay, so first, 760 Russians off the battlefield. It's becoming almost ridiculous that I keep saying this is one of the highest days of the war, but again, this is the fifth highest day now, displacing other days. 760 is a very high figure. So 760 Russians off the battlefield, 8 tanks, 22 armored fighting vehicles, 23 artillery systems, 60 vehicles and fuel tanks. The number of tanks and artillery or armored fighting vehicles tells me that this is more meat wave than it is something that's, mechanized assault. Otherwise, you'd see greater vehicle losses. If we want to look at that, Andrew Perpetua's list is about a little better than 1-to-1, not much more than that. So it's not great. I prefer to see 3-to-1, but okay, that's where we are. All right, November 2024, Ukrainian defenders destroyed more than 300 tanks, almost 900 infantry fighting vehicles, 900 artillery systems, and including some very rare and expensive weapons like S-400 Triumph air defense system that was hit with air rockets or missiles. Ironically, Zupar, counter-battery radar, things along those lines. So there's quite a bit of destruction that happened last month. Now, let's talk about drones. Ukrainian Air Force reported that overnight, 28 Shahed drones were launched with 20 and 22 were shot down. One more was suppressed by electronic warfare. 2 returned to Belarus. Now, once upon a time, it used to be that the Russians, and I've talked about this before, the Russians could produce about 16 per day. And that was the height of what they were able to actually accomplish. Well, they're able to do a lot more than that now, apparently. And I saw this and I thought, wow, that's an interesting chart. This is just a normal day in Europe. Russian drones damage energy infrastructure in Ternopil, Rivne, Oblast. Ukraine intercepted 22 at the 28, as we just talked about. But this is normal air traffic, normal planes away outside of Ukraine. And these are patterns of drone flights. I think they're going to show the pattern of where the drone goes. It's not just individual drones, but yeah, I mean, quite a contrast. Okay, Ukraine is asking NATO countries to find an opportunity to transfer at least 20 air defense systems so that Ukraine can avoid a blackout, according to the foreign minister. Okay, like what just happened in Ternopil, the Russians keep trying to destroy the electrical infrastructure, and they just keep coming. The hits keep coming. Russia increased domestic production of Shahed drones, as allowed Russia to increase the number of drones it's using in its strikes launched at Ukraine. But Ukrainian electronic warfare innovations are enabling Ukrainian forces to more effectively respond to Russian strike packages. So, are they producing more? Yes, somehow they're producing more, but they're not terribly effective in and of themselves. They're more effective when they swarm than when you just send 15. So when you send 100, it becomes harder to knock those down, especially if you send 100 of those and you send some missiles at the same time. Okay, let's get to the big story today, and that's this. Zelensky is challenging the number of killed and wounded in Ukraine, but he didn't give any actual figures. He just said it's not this. Okay, Zelensky believes that the losses estimated by Western media are inaccurate. What are we talking about? The Economist magazine came out with a couple of days ago a figure of somewhere between 60 and 100,000 killed and 400,000 wounded. Okay, so, but he doesn't reveal the real number either. So let's go into the actual article. Zelensky says Western media exaggerates Ukrainian losses. He said recently, I believe in the American press, some information was provided stating that 80,000 Ukrainians have died. But I want to tell you, no, it's less, much less, the president told Kyoto News. Now, The Economist magazine has tracked down at least 60,000. Like they're very confident about 60,000 killed. Okay, here's the little bit from The Economist. According to The Economist, it estimates in late November, Ukraine has likely lost between 60,000 to 100,000 Ukrainian military personnel since 24 February 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Another 400,000 have been severely injured. Again, that's an estimate. But if it's not 80, if it's less than 80,000, let's say it's 70,000, right? And then you give the multiple for the casualties appropriately as well. So let's look at this: 70,000 and 300,000, as opposed to up to 100,000 and 400,000. Okay, so that would give us 370,000 Ukrainian casualties. Let's say 745, 700, that would be about 49%. So that would mean instead of for every 3 Russians off the battlefield, there are 2 Ukrainian casualties. For every 2, there's 1 Ukrainian casualty. Okay, that's a better figure, but I don't know that we're necessarily able to hang our hats on that. This is an estimate, and an estimate works kind of well, but we just aren't sure. In this video, I did the math based on the Economist magazine's numbers, and that's where I got the 2 for every 3 Russians. But Zelensky's going on and saying that since September 2024, the ratio of casualties has been approximately 8 enemy soldiers killed for every Ukrainian service member lost. Now, let's take him at face value and say that that's the case. That changes our calculus, at least for the last couple months. And I'll show you what that looks like. So again, we're making assumptions here. So we're saying since September. So if we say since September 30th, that's different than if we say since September 1st. But let's just look at this, because I'm not interested in the total numbers as much as the percentages. Let's look at it from September 1st, let's say. Yeah, that's really when things were really heating up anyway. 1524 times 30, that's the losses for the last month, and then 1354 times 31, that's for the previous month, and then 1271 times 31, that's the losses for the previous month. So this is November, October, and September. 127,000 Russian casualties over those 3 months. That's a lot. Now that we know, that's definite. There's no question about that. Now, we're going to ballpark here and say about 3 injured for every killed. And that would mean that there's about 31,000 killed in Russia, right? On the Russian side of this equation, 31,000 killed. And then we're going to look at that and say we have 31,000. So this was 31,773. So 31,773. And then we're going to say 1 to 8. So we know what this is, and let's go with what an eighth of this is. And that's 3,971. And so about 4,000 to about 30,000. It's possible. I mean, and when I say it's possible because of what you see on the battlefield. Like you see forced mobilization in Moscow here. This is Jay in Kyiv posting this today. And I already heard this from Greg Terry last week that they are forced mobilizing, they are force mobilizing in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, where they hadn't been doing that before. They've been doing it in peripheral areas before. So there is something to this. Now, Russian mill bloggers continue to criticize poor Russian military command decisions and poor training and discipline among Russian personnel, according to the ISW. So I've seen where they have a week or 2 weeks worth of training before being pushed into the meat grinder. Well, that would help confirm that there's going to be higher losses on the Russian side. And then Ukrainian forces recently advanced near Chasiv Yar, and Russian forces recently advanced in Torets, Pokrovsk, Kharkiv, and other places. And we'll show how many times they assaulted. And when you're on the defending side as opposed to the attacking side, you take fewer losses. So let's look at this. In the Kherson region, there were 2 enemy attacks. In the Seversk region, there was once. And in the Bakhmut front, there were 4 attacks. In Kupiansk direction, 6 attacks. North of Kharkiv, 6 times. Horlivka, 8 attacks. In the Lyman direction, they attacked Ukrainian positions 11 times. Pokrovsk, 40 times. That's what we expect, right? Remivka direction, 40 times. That's new. We haven't heard about that being that high lately. Karak of direction 67 times. I think that's a record for when since I've been doing this. By the way, tell me how you like in the comments below when I kind of give you the scale by showing you which direction and how many attacks. Is that useful to you? If it is, I'll keep doing it. If it's not, I can do something else. So is it possible that there's this heavily outweighted 8-to-1 kind of thing since September of Russians killed versus Ukrainians killed? Sure, it's possible. I mean, it seems like that is possible. We're trying to wrap our minds around as much information as we actually have, and it's really hard to tell what's actually going on. Okay, the U.S. has announced a new package of military support to Ukraine containing equipment worth $725 million. This includes munitions for NASAMS and Stingers and HIMARS and 155 millimeter and 105 millimeter shells. So that's coming. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm frustrated. I feel like I'm not actually doing enough or contributing enough or that sort of thing, and I wish I could do something more. Here is a pensioner who created 96 bases for camouflage nets in over 2 years. He just works at home, and this is how he helps the war effort at the front. It doesn't matter as long as it stays in place on the radiator or anywhere else. You have to keep pulling it tight all the time. This is how you tie a knot. Each time you make a loop, this creates a net with a mesh size of 60 millimeters. I need to weave 7.5 meters in length so that it measures 6 meters. The width will be 4 meters with 50 meshes, and I need a 7.5 meter cord to make the length. Now this sounds like drudgery to me, but I'm sure he appreciates that he can actually contribute to the effort in some meaningful way. And good on him for doing that. It's very necessary. So this is what it looks like when FPV drone pilots send their drones out to battle. They're monitoring and watching what's going on. They'll either have it on a monitor or have some kind of goggles on, watching the drones go after their targets. There's a guy with goggles and there's a target. And I'm not going to show you the boom, but okay. But I think drone warfare is going to change radically in the next year or so. Ukraine has long-range drones with a 1,800 kilometer range. According to the minister, Fedorov outlined Ukraine's development of AI-powered swarm drones, Shahed interceptors, and plans for tens of thousands of land drones, aiming for 30,000 long-range UAVs by 2025. So not just the number is going to increase, but you're also going to be cutting out the middleman eventually when AI is powering it, and that's going to change the battlefield dramatically. Be looking more like Star Wars than it will be like what we've been used to in warfare. Okay, here's the last little bit. The Russian Human Rights Commissioner has published the names of 630 POWs whom the Kyiv regime refuses to take back, hoping that the move would lead to a change in the situation. Well, Darth Putin commented on that 2 points. I'll do the second point first. POWs, prisoners of war? War? You're not supposed to admit that this is a war, you idiots. And then the first point, which I found even more interesting. If you ever feel like your job is completely pointless, consider the Kremlin employs someone to be a human rights commissioner. It's a good point. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.